Everything I do is based on a love of music, and I spend some of my time composing, some of my time playing, and a bit of conducting, recording, collecting instruments, studying instruments, sometimes taking instruments apart and putting them back together again. So long as I'm spending my time being involved in music, I don't really mind which part of it I'm doing. My writing process, I'm a bit old school. I compose at a keyboard and it tends to be a piano. You can project any sound you want on the sound of a piano, but of course it's a transient sound and the sound dies away. So if I know a score is going to be very sustained, let's say for example like the Barber Adagio for strings, I will just bring in a basic synth that either has a really good sustained sound and just play to picture using that. But I also look very hard to find a sound that isn't a standard orchestral sound. You know, everyone's been playing with the orchestra and there's nothing new under the sun really. You have to find your bits of, your new shades of originality from some other source. And that becomes part of the writing process too. I think you can characterize elements or characters with instruments, and it needs to be done very subtly, or it needs to be done with humour. I was just watching a part of Series 3 of Fargo the other night where they used Peter and the Wolf, and they juxtaposed the characters in Peter and the Wolf with characters within the show. And of course, every time they came along, it was the oboe or the kettle drums or the clarinet. And all that works great, but it was really funny. So it was a bit of a cliche, but it worked fantastically well. So don't rule anything out, don't rule anything in. Just see what works for you. Well, my father was a keen amateur composer. He also played the flute and the recorder and the piano. In fact, he worked as a sort of, in his spare time, as a hotel foyer pianist for a while, so he could improvise too. And he just developed in me a real enthusiasm for musical instruments, a real love of musical instruments. So I worked on Saturdays in a music shop for a few months when I was in my early teens, and I just got to play all the instruments in the shop when there were no customers in. And it just made me want to remain somehow attached to all musical instruments. I think as an orchestrator, and I love the art of orchestration, to actually know how you would finger something on a viola or a cello, what works nicely on a flute or a clarinet, what's slightly too high for the French horns. That's a really nice way to approach orchestration. So there's no downside to it, except that I've spent way too much money on musical instruments, and my house is way too full of musical instruments. But I love them; they're my friends. And if I want new ideas, I'll just pick up an instrument I haven't played for a while, and I'll improvise on that instrument for a bit. And it leads you into different areas, just because of the physicality of the instrument. And the different timbres that the instrument can produce. For me, it's just like a kid with a new toy at Christmas, and it connects me with my youth. It reconnects me with music. I mean, I've been a clarinetist since I was 10 years old, and I bought my first contrabass clarinet last year. And I couldn't take it to bed with me, but I was inseparable from that instrument for about a week after getting it. And I phoned all my mates and said, "Do you need any sampling on a contrabass clarinet? Because I can't get this instrument out of my hands." And you play things that you wouldn't play on any other instrument, because it's not like a contrabassoon, it's not like a tuba, it's not like a double bass. I mean, when I was working on Interstellar, I was in charge of all the woodwinds, and Hans told me that we've used this great batch of new samples from orchestral tools, Berlin woodwinds they're called, they're the best I've tried, and we used all of those things. And I said, okay, I'm doing this, but I want 2 contrabass clarinets. And we ended up with 2 contrabass clarinets, 2 bass clarinets, and 2 contrabassoons. So we had the deepest foundations of probably any woodwind section that had ever been assembled at Air Studios. And I think contrabass clarinets get used quite a lot now. But they're a symbol of everything that's great about our music industry, because I bought mine second-hand on eBay from a dealer in Seattle who sells old instruments from school wind bands. So I got mine for a reasonable price. A new contrabass clarinet costs £18,000. No player is ever going to earn that money back, even if they get booked in Abbey Road to bring that instrument twice a month. It's done for the love of the instrument. It's done for the love of music. It's done for being original and for being not a part of the herd and taking a punt. You know, a player investing in music, investing in the outcome. I'll never make that money back on that sub-contrabass clarinet, but it really makes me happy having it. Like everyone, I'm always on the lookout for. It's amazing how much value brand new combinations of sound are. They can add so much originality to what you're producing, probably more than the compositional ideas themselves, because people go, oh, that's new. And that, like I said, that was very big in the 80s, and then that, as everyone was experimenting with sampled orchestras, that went away for a bit, and now it's all come back in a hurry. Obviously there are sounds that come from samplers and analog synthesizers that people can't identify, and there's quite a hunger for those kind of sounds, because an oboe, we all know what an oboe sounds like, we all know what a flute or a French horn sounds like, and the originality has to come from some other place. And that's, we made the Chinese series, the PHOENIX Orchestra, which I think covers that vast continent pretty comprehensively. But to a lot of people, that won't be, let's make a Chinese orchestra track, let's find a sound that people won't recognize. To be the sonic emblem of a certain character or a certain place. We've done it for China, we're now doing it for South America, and hopefully we'll go on to cover the other continents or areas that have their own instruments, their own sound world. I think you have to make a decision. Are you using the sample as a means to an end, or as the end in itself? A lot of people have written for the duduk, and they've played it on a keyboard, and they've probably played it chromatically, and they've probably played it with a little bit of extra range. And then in comes your friend from Armenia, and he says, I can't play this. It's in the wrong key, and I can't play that note because it's too high. And then a massive amount of vary speed and, cutting and pasting, and it's almost as if you're creating it synthetically, but with the real instrument. It really helps to know what the true range of an instrument is and what its home key should be, because if you're booking a player to come in, you want them to feel comfortable, and you want them to feel that they've given themselves their best chance of showing how good their instrument can sound and how well they can play. The whole thing has become, on one hand, very democratized, or you can say it's kind of thinned out a bit and spread out a bit. You can view it in all sorts of different ways, but certainly a lot of opportunities for talent to rise to the top, and they have to fight, because there are a lot of people who've got the same gear as they've got, and there's got to be a kernel or a spark of an idea in there that gets them the job. That's why Johan Johansson was my favourite composer until he sadly wasn't able to compose anymore. Because there was a man who strove for pure originality. The way I feel kind of morally, as it were, about sampling is, first of all, you can't uninvent it. That genie is out of the bottle now and ain't ever going back in. But what I've seen over my lifetime as a composer, I've seen the whole industry dominated by a handful of names. And now, when I'm doing awards viewing for BAFTA, in my case, I see 100, 120 names. And that's because these people, these young composers coming through, have had samples to play with, and they've been able to hone their skills using them. Of course, their ambition is to go out there and book a 120-piece orchestra. And there are other people who will continue to make a living just using samples mixed with a few solo instruments. But I always tell my orchestral musician friends that, on balance, the use of sampling creates work rather than denying them work. And right now, through COVID, through everything else, Air Studios is fully booked. It's rammed 24/7. Abbey Road, you can't get in till next May. All my orchestral players, friends, are busy. So I don't think they could be working harder if you wanted them to, you know. And there's a load of new composers coming through, all of whom want to use orchestras. So, you know, I rest my case. European culture has been very well covered in the sampling world. I know that Orchestral Tools have pretty much got the definitive Western orchestra and all the bells and whistles. So Europe is covered. Tomorrow, the world. You know, I think we've got to accept that we are not the only fountain of music in the world, and China's, the second biggest movie market in the world now, I think. We have to embrace all our friends around the world. I think, you know, we started with China, which I think is, you know, we had Mulan to work with and Harry, and that was great. I think South America was an ideal counterbalance to that. I think we need to enfranchise all these different instruments, you know, because so much drama is now from a different time, from a different place, or some kind of amazing amalgam. I mean, because when people are inventing a fantasy world, you know, just like the costumes, they find a bit from Tudor England, they find a bit from the Incas, and some little bit of wall design from Thailand or whatever. You know, they're like magpies. They take a little bit of culture from everywhere. And film scores are going to be doing that more and more. I can think of several examples of things that are either already running on streaming services or are coming up soon, where they're not coming from a recognised country or a recognised period in history. And everything's make-believe. Everything's starting from a blank canvas. So we haven't got the world till we've got it all, basically.